So one of these shots is taken on an iPhone, and the other shot is taken on a $3,000 professional camera setup. Can you spot the difference? So companies like Apple brag about how pro their cameras have gotten on their phones, so I want to dive in and see whether or not that's actually true.
Okay, so the first shot was taken on the iPhone, and this is the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Look, I know I don't have the 17 Pro Max, but like, come on, it's basically the same thing. So the iPhone has 3 cameras, a main, an ultra wide, and a telephoto. Okay, so there's a lot of specs on the screen, so let me try and break these down as best as I can. You might notice that I put the megapixel count last on the spec sheet, and that's because it's actually the least important part of the camera. Long story short, we've reached a point where basic phone cameras are going to have enough megapixels to where they're not going to be a limiting factor anymore. For example, to shoot 4K video, you actually only need about an 8.3 megapixel sensor. The iPhone 4S from 2011 launched with an 8 megapixel sensor. The most important spec here is the actual size of the sensor itself. See, a camera's sensor is the part that's actually going to read the light that's coming in. The bigger the sensor, the more light gets let in and the more information the camera has to work with, and that's going to result in a higher quality image. Here's a size comparison of the 3 sensors on the iPhone. As you can see, the main camera sensor is the largest, so in theory, it should shoot the highest quality video. The next spec to look at is the aperture. If you were to take a regular camera and try to point and shoot with it without a lens, you'd get something that looks like this. You need a lens to focus the light before the sensor can actually capture it. Lenses have different aperture values. A lower aperture value means that the lens allows more light in before it actually hits the sensor. There's a whole lot of technical stuff that we could get into here, but we're not going to do that in this video. Just know that the main difference here is that the higher your aperture, the less of that cinematic background blur that you're going to get in your videos. The iPhone lenses all have pretty low aperture values, so there's really no concerns there. And finally, the last spec, the focal length. So the higher the lens's focal length, then the more zoomed in a shot is going to appear. So the ultra wide on an iPhone with a 13mm focal length is going to have a very wide shot, whereas the telephoto with 120mm is going to have a very zoomed in shot. So, okay, what does all this actually mean? To understand that, let's introduce our second camera into the mix. This is the Sony A6700. It has a 26 megapixel sensor, which as we discussed isn't going to matter, and it uses what's called an APS-C sensor. That's just a nickname for a common sensor size in cameras. If you compare the Sony sensor to the iPhone's camera sensors, you can see that it's actually quite a bit larger, which in theory should result in greater image quality. Now on to the lenses. I have 2 lenses that I'll be using for this comparison. The first is this ultra-wide lens. Compared to the iPhone's ultra-wide, it has an f1.8 aperture and about a 17mm focal length. And the second lens is going to be a variable zoom lens, and we're going to use 2 settings. The first is going to be f2.8 at 26mm, which we're going to compare to the 24mm sensor on the iPhone. And the second is f2.8 at 107mm, which compares to the 120mm telephoto lens on the iPhone. Okay, enough nerding out about specs already. So the shot that you're looking at right now is the headshot that I use for my videos. I'm going to be setting up both cameras for this shot. So on the iPhone, I'm going to be using its main 24mm lens, and then on the Sony, I'm going to use the 26mm lens. For this comparison, I'm also going to do my best in editing to kind of make sure that the shots are the same amount of zoom, even though the lenses are slightly different. That way you can't just tell by trying to look at which one's more zoomed in. And finally, for the iPhone, I'm going to be using the Blackmagic camera app, which allows me to change around a bunch of settings manually, and I'll be shooting in log footage just like I do on the Sony camera, and that's going to allow me to capture more color detail. And look, if you don't understand what I just said, then just don't worry about it. This is a talking head shot with camera A. This is a talking head shot filmed using camera B. Can you tell which is which? Well, before I answer that question, let me move on to another scenario that I might encounter while I'm filming a video. Now, in theory, this is the situation where the Sony should really shine. Having a larger sensor means that the Sony is going to allow a lot more information in these low light scenarios, whereas the iPhone might struggle with a smaller sensor and introduce what's called visual noise. So I'm gonna set up the same shot, but this time I'm not going to use the lights right here that are actually lighting up my face. This is a low light shot filmed with camera A. This is a low light shot filmed using camera B. Okay, so now I'm gonna set up a vlog style shot where I'm gonna kind of walk around the room with the two cameras and then kind of compare the two. So I'll be using two gimbals here, one's for the iPhone and then one's for the Sony. And as you can probably tell, the iPhone is a lot easier to use just because it's less bulky for this kind of shot. So if I were gonna shoot vlogs, then I kind of would automatically default to the iPhone. But let's just compare the two just to see what the image quality is gonna look like. Okay, this is a vlog style shot with camera A. Just gonna, I don't know, browse around my room a little bit. Oh, got a light around here. I'm not particularly good at this kind of filming, so yeah, you get the point. This is a vlog style shot with camera B. Just gonna walk around the room here, very similar to last time. Yeah, there you go. So for both of these shots, I'm gonna be using what's called an ND filter. Think of it kind of like sunglasses for your camera. And for this final shot, I used the exact same setup as the previous section, but I just zoomed in. Okay, so in this whole video, camera A was the Sony and camera B was the iPhone. So could you tell the difference?